Okay, so last time we raised, we articulated Putnam's position and then raised a, we articulated Putnam's position further and then raised a problem for the position and then offered a solution. And the solution was that uh, Putnam doesn't think that natural kind terms have a simple intension, one on which they automatically refer to a natural kind, or otherwise they don't refer. Rather, he thinks that natural kind terms have a complex intension on which, if there is an underlying structure, a real natural kind, then that's what they refer to. If there's multiple, like 2, 3 underlying structures, then they refer to the disjunction of those 2 or 3 underlying structures. If there's so many underlying structures that things would get unruly and there's no longer much value in talking about underlying structure, then natural kind terms refer to a superficial kind, comprised of the properties that we ordinarily recognize the water, we ordinarily use to recognize water as water. Okay, this time we're going to look at a puzzle that arises if you adopt this view, and this is a puzzle that Ron Paul and I generate. It would be odd if natural kind terms had the kind of semantic structure that Putnam says they do when there is a natural kind out there in the world, but otherwise they didn't. Put another way, it would be odd if we were so perfect that we only introduce terms that have that kind of natural kind sense when there is in fact a natural kind, otherwise we don't. Well, if that's right, then we should expect there to be some kind terms, terms for kinds of things, that we think refer descriptively. We think they have a simple intention that is captured by kind of Frege's view. But contrary to our expectation, contrary to what we think, they have the same exact semantic structure as natural kind terms. It's just that the preliminary conditionals are defeated because there is no underlying kind, and they therefore refer to a superficial kind. To put it another way, some terms that we think of as superficial kind terms are probably such that they probably already have a meaning such that if there were an underlying kind, they would refer to that kind rather than to the superficial description. So which ones? Which terms should we expect to be like this? Well, Ron Paul and I offer an answer. We say that when the existence of a natural kind out there in the world, that is, the existence of an underlying kind, would have sufficient explanatory punch, that is, it would explain why, say, 2 samples behave in the same way, or 2 individuals behave in the same way, and it would explain that often enough, and it's something that we have an interest in explaining, then the relevant terms will have a natural kind sense. And in the paper, we run through a myriad of examples. I'm not going to do this in detail here, but I'll just quickly gloss one of the examples we consider. So consider the word bully. It's standard to define a bully as follows. A bully is one who intimidates smaller and weaker opponents, systematically harasses and intimidates smaller and weaker opponents. Here's a question. What makes someone a bully? Well, it's natural to answer that by pointing to that definition and say, well, someone is a bully if and only if that person systematically intimidates smaller and weaker people. Well, if Ron Paul and I are right, and we're right about bully in particular, then in fact, the word bully has the same semantic structure as the word water. So the sort of leading conditional would be this. If there is an underlying structure that explains why the various people that we've called bully engage in bullying behavior, then to be a bully is to have that underlying structure. And that raises the possibility that there could be somebody who has that underlying structure, but due to very unusual circumstances, never systematically intimidates smaller and weaker people. And thus, the person would count as a bully because they have that structure, even though they never engage in bullying behavior. It also raises the possibility that someone does systematically engage in bullying behavior, that is, they systematically intimidate smaller and weaker people, but that person isn't a bully because they don't have that underlying structure. To put it flippantly, it raises the possibility that someone could be a bully even though they never bully anyone, and someone could fail to be a bully even though they bully people regularly, assuming that the same semantics we're saying holds for the sort of noun bully doesn't hold for the verb bully. Okay, That's the basic idea, that there's going to be terms like this, and in fact, lots of terms like this. And in fact, we think many philosophical terms are like this. So terms like conscious, terms like free and voluntary, I think are like this. And in the paper, we explore some interesting consequences if you think that this is true of the word free, and I'll mention those briefly in a moment. But first, the general upshot. The general upshot is this. It suggests that a kind of just as convergent realism can be true for scientific theories that mostly include natural kind terms, convergent realism can be true for scientific or philosophical theories that mostly include what we might have thought of as superficial kind terms. So you might have thought that convergent realism isn't plausible when it comes to, even if convergent realism is plausible for scientific theories. Sorry, let me back up. You might have thought this, that even if convergent realism is plausible for scientific theories, because scientific theories' natural kind terms have their meaning fixed by the world, an analog of convergent realism isn't plausible for scientific theories that include superficial kind terms or for philosophical theories, because superficial kind terms and correspondingly philosophical terms like voluntary and conscious and knowledge have their meanings fixed descriptively, not by the world. They have a semantics like Frege thought natural kind terms have, not a semantics like Putnam thought natural kind terms have. But if Professor Desange and I are correct that many philosophical terms have a semantics it's very much like the semantics of natural kind terms, then we can get a kind of convergent realism for philosophy. And we can talk about philosophical progress in the same way that we talk about scientific progress.